Namaskar. We will be continuing with module 6.1 where we have been talking about motivation and needs, motions and moods, and consumer involvement. In the previous session, we have dealt with involvement. We have defined involvement, the different types of involvement, the nature of involvement, and the mechanism underlying the involvement process. Today, we shall be speaking about and concluding this particular module, and while speaking about it, we will be talking on consumer behavioral models based on involvement and consumer involvement and implications for the marketer. So, we will be concluding this module with session 5 with topic 6.1.9 consumer behavior models based on involvement, and topic 6.1.10 which is consumer involvement and implications for the marketer. So, let us begin with our session 6.1.9 which is consumer behavior models based on involvement. Yesterday we have seen that involvement basically will influence, it will impact the manner in which people gather information, they evaluate information, or they gather, comprehend, process information and transmit information. Involvement also impacts the manner in which they make a purchase decision, as also the manner in which they evaluate the post purchase outcome. So, it is very important for a marketer that he designs a marketing mix that can involve the involvement process to his favor. It can activate the involvement process to his favor, and here marketing communication has a big role to play. We assume correctly that the level of consumer involvement increases, the consumer has greater information, he has greater motivation to gather information, comprehend, elaborate and assimilate information. So, it is very important for a marketer to have a marketing mix or to design his marketing mix in such a manner that he can activate the consumer involvement process to his favor. And over here, if we see, marketing communication or the communication mix has a big role to play. So, let us see how how communication impacts learning, and while doing that we will speak on the low involvement learning model. So, let us discuss what the low level involvement model is. Now, yesterday we had discussed what low involvement products were. We discussed that they are products which are low in value, low in value for money, they are low in terms of perceived risk, they are either low priced or maybe very moderately priced, or they are very inexpensive, and they are very frequently purchased. In fact, they are purchased very regularly, and they become gradually over a period of time they become habitual purchases. They become very routinized regular purchases, and the consumer does not have to expend any amount of physical or cognitive effort in the decision process for such products and services. So, we could have examples of candies, ice creams, toothpaste, soap, butter. They are all products which are low on involvement because they are either low priced or moderately priced. The level of they have a low value for money, perceived level of risk is low, and they are very frequently purchased. Now, for such products we will see that consumers basically give very little thought to pre-purchase, and feelings may not be formed for the product until the purchase has actually occurred. So, if we look at the the hierarchy of effects of low and high involvement decisions, which was proposed by Asel in 1992, and if you look at that, which we also discussed yesterday. So, if you look at that, the tri-component cognition of attitude and behavior are arranged in such a manner that the consumer will give little thought and feelings will not be formed till he actually goes in to purchase those products. So, we have a sequence where cognition leads to behavior and behavior leads to attitudes. So, if you see low involvement products over there, because they are purchased as a matter of routine, very little cognitive effort goes about in the purchase of such products and services, and the consumer will form an attitude or frame an attitude of liking or disliking only after he has purchased them or he has tried them out. So, the sequence of the tri-component cognition, attitude and behavior is in terms of cognition, behavior and attitude. It is more to do with CBA rather than a CAB. So we start with cognition, we move to the behavior, and then we move to attitude. So the attitude is actually formed after the purchase has been made. Now if we go a little deeper into this, we will see that marketing communication through audiovisual media or through the that is through the television or through the radio follows this principle. Through his advertisement, the marketer informs the consumer about his product or service offering. He educates him about his product offering, about his brand, and this brand may be either a new product altogether, or it may be a modified version of an existing product. He tries to create awareness in the minds of the consumer. He tries to inform the consumer and tries to create an awareness about his product and service offering and or his brand in the minds of the consumer. Now at this stage, his objective is not to actually form attitude or change attitude. Form attitude in the case of a new product, or change attitudes in the case of modified versions. His object is basically neither attitude creation nor attitude formation. It is just trying to create awareness. It is trying to inform the consumer about the product or service offering and about the brand. So if we see this, if we go beyond the object, the message is designed in such a manner that it's informative, that provides information about the product, about the brand, what it is, how it is used, how good it is, or what are the what are the benefits that the product entails. And so the basic objective is to create awareness in the minds of the consumer about the product or service offering without changing the attitude or without creating the attitude. As I said, creating the attitude will happen when it's a new product. Changing or modifying the attitude will happen when it's a modification of an existing product. So but the marketer's objective is neither creating nor forming or modifying attitudes. His basic objective is just to create awareness, just to provide information to the consumer so as to create some information, so as to lead to cognition about or a knowledge base about the product or service offering and the brand. So he basically just aims at developing a message cognition through the message content, and he tries to replace the old beliefs with new ones, or older information with newer information, without changing the attitude. Also through the social effects and through picturization of the product or service offering, through the message content, the message context, the jingle, the music, or the celebrity or the spokesperson, the marketer tries to elicit some kind of a behavior on the part of the consumer. He may also use sales promotion to bring about a quick boost on his sales, or to encourage people to quickly go and buy his product or service offering. So either through the special effects and picturization, or through endorsements by celebrities and spokesperson, the music, the jingle, etc., either through the ad or through sales promotion schemes, which will be short-term incentives given to consumers to purchase either within a period of time or till stock lasts. So in both of these ways, through ads and through advertisements, the marketer tries to elicit behavior on part of the consumer. If the consumer is satisfied with the purchase, he feels that he has received positive reinforcement and he learns to buy the same brand again. On the other hand, if the consumer is dissatisfied, he receives a negative reinforcement, and the likelihood of a repetition of that behavior of buying the same product or the same brand gets reduced. So we see that either through advertisements or through sales promotion, the marketer will try and encourage consumers to act, to buy his product. Sales promotion could also include, apart from sales, discounts or rebates or buy one get one free. Sales promotions could also mean in terms of free trials. Okay, so or in case of a new soap is launched, so the marketer can say buy X shampoo and get the X brand of soap free. So he encourages trial. So either as a trial or as the first purchase, the marketer would try to elicit action through either of them, either through a sales promotion or through through trial or through first purchase. And through this, based on the experience or based on the reinforcement that the consumer receives, he or she will tend to repeat his behavior or tend not to repeat his behavior. In case there is positive reinforcement, in case the consumer is happy, he is satisfied, he will buy the product again, he will buy the brand again. In case he is not, he will not do so. He will learn not to patronize the brand. So either he learns to repurchase or he learns to not to repurchase and switch off to another brand. So this is what we mean by low involvement learning model, that the marketer will through his marketing communication, either through through the advertisements, he will make the people aware of these products or these brands, and through sales promotion and advertisements, through both of them, he will encourage them to act, he will influence them to act, and once they act, then based on the reinforcement that they receive, consumers will learn to buy, rebuy and patronize the brand, or learn not to buy, not to patronize that particular brand. So this is what we mean by the low involvement learning model. Now this has implications for a marketer. Okay, now how? The first is that low involvement products need to be dealt very differently than the high involvement products. The marketer needs to basically follow a sequence of cognition, behavior and attitude, which I just said. What he needs to do is he just needs to inform the consumers first, encourage them to act, and based on the act of purchase and the post purchase outcome, consumers will frame an attitude frame an attitude in terms of liking or dislike, favorableness or unfavorableness towards the product and or brand. So the consumer will learn either to patronize the brand or not to patronize it. He will patronize it, he will learn to patronize when a positive attitude is formed, he begins to like it, he has a favorable attitude towards the brand. On the other hand, he will not patronize the brand or because he dislikes it, because his experience has been dissatisfying, and so he will learn not to buy the brand again. So the low involvement model here says that marketers basically need to deal with low involvement and high involvement products very differently. For low involvement, they would need to follow the cognition, behavior and attitude, and for high involvement, they will follow the cognition, attitude and behavior. The second implication that can be drawn in this context is that low involvement products could make best use of low involvement media. When we talk of low involvement media, we refer to the TV and the radio, which are referred to as the audiovisual media, and they are said to be they are said to bring about the desirable behavior so far as low involvement products are concerned. As far as high involvement products are concerned, the high involvement media works, and high involvement media here refers to the print media, because it is with the print media that not only will a person gain information, but while he is comprehending this information, while he is processing this information, it is going to lead to development of attitudes, and thereafter he would go in for an action, or he would go in for an act of purchase. So for high involvement products, the print media or the high involvement media is more desirable to bring about a change from cognition to attitude to behavior. Now the third implication that can be drawn is that marketers could benefit from if they relate low involvement products with day-to-day needs and present them in the form of slice of the life commercials. These products, now as we have discussed earlier, low involvement products are those which are routinely purchased. They become a part of our routinized behavior. Many a times they are also in the form of impulse purchases like chocolates or candies. So, or even it could be also a very need based or an emergency item in the form of medicines. So medicines, though we said yesterday, are high involvement, but because of emergency reasons, a person would be just drawn into buying a medicine as quickly as possible, because it's a matter of, say, pain, agony or life and death. Leaving that aside, which we will speak of later again, what I'll try to focus here is that marketer should benefit if he relates low involvement products with day-to-day needs, and he tries to present them in the form of slice of the life commercials. What is slice of the life commercial? Slice of the life commercials basically portray day to day problems, day to day issues which we all face, and they come up suddenly and they can be solved suddenly, very quickly, or could be solved without much effort. Like for example, you are walking on the street, and suddenly your shoe tears off or break, and it just opens up. So it's a problem which we all face. It is something which happens to all of us. Now if that is depicted and a product is shown, which a brand is shown which says that if usage of that particular brand X would not put you in such embarrassing situations on the road, then a person would relate it with his need. So the need benefit segmentation and the need benefit relationship comes into play, and the person would be drawn into buying X brand of shoes, because these shoes will not cause, will not just break open or tear off anywhere, and he won't have to face a embarrassing situation again. So marketers could really benefit if, or sometimes we see that we suddenly fall short of some things, that emergency items at home. It could even be Saridon or an aspirin which is suddenly required. So these are also portrayed in the form of slice of life commercials, and if people feel that they could keep a stock of such medicines ready, which are not very high involving, which are used on a day to day basis in many homes. So in that case, we could depict them as slice of the life commercials. Okay, now another way in which marketers could benefit is if they manage to move people from low involvement to high involvement through effective brand management. A marketer should be able to build up a brand, relate it to the segment by the need benefit, or by tapping it to the need and benefit, the lifestyle or social class, etc. So by doing so, he can actually develop brand loyalty. So it would be better, in fact it would be nice, if he can move people from low to high involvement for certain kinds of product and service. It will not happen for each and every kind of low involvement product, but if it could happen for some kinds of products and services which are low on involvement, where a marketer could move people from low involvement to high involvement, it can bring desirable consequences for the marketer, because it can help build brand loyalty. In case of low involvement, brand and loyalty does exist, but the rate of switching is also very, very high. People tend to become, instead of being hardcore loyals, people tend to become soft loyals, or they also become shifting loyals, or they could become even switchers. So they do not basically attach a lot of importance to the loyalty context, concept, especially in the case of low involvement, because each of the comparable alternative, each of the alternatives are equally desirable, equally attractive, and there's very little differentiation amongst them. So the brand loyalty could develop, but to retain brand loyalty would be a problem, or retaining brand loyalty could be, retaining loyalty from customers could be a problem. So marketers often would find it very desirable if they could move people from low involvement to high involvement, because as you move up the involvement level of brand loyalty could increase. Okay, so marketers could benefit if they move just models of consumer involvement. We will talk about the learn, feel, do hierarchy model. We will talk about the level of message processing model, and we will talk about the product versus brand involvement model. Now all of these models we will see, we will talk about in consumer involvement, we will talk about needs, we will talk about appeals, we will talk about advertisements, the message content, the message context, the appeal used in the ad. We will also talk about the high and low involvement media, whether it is the radio or the television, or it will be the print media. So high and low involvement products, high and low involvement media, message content, message context, and the various appeals. So all of these models will talk about and focus on all of these aspects which I just mentioned. So let us first start with the learn, feel, do hierarchy model. Now, this particular model has a lot of implications for marketing communication and for the communication mix, and it was a model which was proposed in 1980s at Foote, Kohn and Bilding, and thus it came also to be known as the FCB matrix. It was proposed by Vogt and his colleagues in the 1980s at Foote, Kohn and Bilding. So we also refer to it as the Foote, Kohn and Bilding matrix, or the FCB matrix. Now, this particular model basically begins with the assumption that one, consumer decision making will vary across product and service categories. They will vary across the nature of product and service offerings. Some product and service offerings on some purchases of related to product and service offerings are backed by a lot of cognition, lot of thought, lot of information, search, processing, elaboration, and final product choice. So there's a lot of effort that goes about it in terms of cognition, and so the consumer spends a lot of time collecting information and knowledge about products, about brands, about evaluative criteria. On the other hand, there are certain other kinds of products where purchases are made not because of cognition and because of functionality or performance or utility, but they're basically based on feelings, on emotions, on aesthetics, on looks, or on design. So our purchases will basically vary across either based on information and logic and rationality and cognition, or they would be based on emotions and moods and feelings and the like. So according to the model, some purchases are backed by a lot of cognition and thinking, and others are backed by a lot of emotions, a lot of feelings, and a lot of thought, a lot of feelings and a lot of emotions, so likes and dislikes. So the combination of this basically acts as reference point for our strategy mix. What will be our communication strategy mix will basically be based on the nature of the product or service offering. The marketer will have to basically choose the appropriate strategy for different kinds of product and service offerings, and this strategy here is more relevant to the communication strategy. So he would have to analyze the nature of the product or service and design his promotion strategy accordingly, and the advertisement medium should access brand involvement models. Now, while doing all these models, we will be relating consumer involvement with motivation, with the communication strategy, the message content, the message context, the appeal. We shall also be talking about the purchase decision making process, how it will vary, and we shall essentially be talking about how involvement affects the consumer decision making process. Let us begin with the learn, feel, do hierarchy model. Now, the learn, feel, do hierarchy model was proposed by Vaughan and his colleagues in the 1980s at Foote, Kohn and Bilding, and that is also came to be known as the FCB matrix. It has a lot of implications for the marketing managers as far as the marketing communication is concerned. So it is a model which talks about the tri-component cognition, attitude and behavior in terms of learn, feel and do, and it was a model which was proposed at Foote, Kohn and Bilding in 1980s, which has also become to known as the FCB matrix. This particular model has bearing on marketing communication and the manner in which the strategies have to be formulated with respect to the message content, the message context, the appeals and the media, whether it should be a high involvement media or a low involvement media. Now, the FCB matrix correctly assumes that consumer decision making varies across the nature of products and services. Some purchases are backed by a lot of cognition and thinking. Other purchases are made on the basis of feelings and emotions. So the combination of these reference points, either in terms of cognition and thinking or in terms of feelings and emotions, actually produce a strategy matrix. The marketer's job is to choose the appropriate strategies based on the nature of product and service offering, and based on the level of involvement with respect to the product or service offerings. A marketer would have to analyze the nature of the product or service offering and thereby decide on his communication strategy, decide on the communication channel, whether it would be a high involvement medium or it would be a low involvement medium. He will also accordingly decide on the message content and the message context, the various appeals that have to be used, and basically the advertisement medium should relate to the product category. Now, if we look at the learn, feel, do model, it's a simple matrix where we will see it relates consumer decision making and consumer choices to the tri components in the form of information, attitude and behavior. So, cognition gets substituted by the word information here, and we will call this model in terms of information or learn, attitude or feel and behavior or do. So, we will refer to it as the learning, feel and do model. Now, if you look at the matrix, it has two dimensions where we talk of high and low involvement, and we talk of thinking and feeling. So, involvement is presented on a continuum. Involvement is presented on a continuum where we see as high and low. Over a period of time, one moves from high involvement to low involvement. On the other hand, on the other axis, we have the two other components, which are thinking and feeling, which again represent two ends of a continuum. With time, there is a movement from thinking towards feeling. So, we will talk of involvement as one dimension and thinking and feeling as the other dimension. Involvement is on a continuum from high to low. Over a period of time, consumers move from high to low involvement, and thinking will move towards feeling over a period of time. Now, if you look at this matrix, we have four cross combinations. There are four cells. We have high involvement and high thinking, we have high involvement and high feeling, we have low involvement and low thinking, and we have low involvement and low feeling. So, we have these four cells, and each of these cells basically has relevance for a marketer in terms of one, identifying the customer type, two, identifying his his focus. Where does the focus of the consumer lie? Does it lie on rationality or does it lie on feelings? 3, it also helps us identify the products which will fall into each of these cells. 4, it has relevance for the marketer in terms of his communication strategy. So, let us talk about each of these cells and how a marketer could benefit by understanding each of these cells and draw upon learnings from these. So, we will start with the high involvement and high thinking quadrant. This quadrant of the matrix consists of high involvement and high thinking, typically signifying higher levels of rationality. The people who approach the marketplace with such high involvement and high thinking are called informative, and they are primarily thinkers. The decision making involves a lot of thinking. Because of the nature of the products which fall into this category, consumers have a high need for cognition. They are primarily driven by economic motives. Examples which fall into this quadrant will include cars or laptops, real estate, or new products or innovative products. And the strategy here for a marketer is learn, feel and do. That means first educate the consumer about your product or service offering and the brand. Try and develop an attitude in his mind, favorable attitude, and then encourage him or convince him to buy or to purchase. Now, this is with respect to the nature of the consumer, which will be informative and thinker. 2, his need for cognition or need for information is very high, and 3, it's going to be the quadrant basically involves products with a high involvement product. Strategy is essentially learn, feel and do. Second is high involvement and high feeling. Now, this particular quadrant is representative of situations which are high involving and high feeling. There is high level of involvement information, and while there is the level of involvement is very high, the information and thinking is less important than the feeling factor. People who approach the marketplace with such an orientation are effective by nature. They are called feelers. The affect component is much stronger than the cognitive component, and the person is drawn by feeling, emotions and psychological motives. They feelers to the product. So examples which fall into products which fall into these category could be sports cars, motorcycles, fashion apparel, jewelry, perfumes, etc. And the strategy for a marketer is basically feel, learn and do. That is, make the first style your product or design your product very aesthetically, so that the consumers begin to have feel positively towards it, or have a favorable have a liking towards it. Then try to educate the consumer about your product and service offering and about your brand, and finally make them act. So this is with reference to the nature of the consumer, who will be effective or feeler. He will be drawn into action based on emotions, based on feelings, and the products will be in terms of fashion apparel and jewelry, and a strategy here is feel, learn and do. Moving to the third quadrant, which is a low involvement and low thinking. Now here it requires minimal effort on the part of the consumer, both in terms of involvement and in terms of thinking. It actually results from habit formation within the consumer as a result of habitual purchase and routinized buying and routinized purchase. So the people who approach the marketplace here will refer to as doers. They are basically people who have developed a habit. So it's habit formation, and the consumer or the customer who approaches the marketplace is referred to as a doer. Over a period of time, all products fall into this category. Examples of the products will be in terms of bread, stationery, soap or other staples, and the model here is do, learn and feel. That is, the consumer first buys it, or the marketer encourages the consumer to first buy it. Based on his experience, either in terms of positive or negative reinforcement, the consumer learns to patronize or not to patronize the particular brand, and he finally develops a feeling. So he learns. It is the learning experience of the consumer which develops an attitude of likingness or dislike towards a particular brand. Finally, we have the fourth quadrant, where we talk of low involvement and low feeling, where the product is basically it's going to signify low involvement and low feeling, yet it promotes self satisfaction. Consumers who buy such products basically do so to satisfy their personal tastes, many a times being influenced by peer pressure or by social pressure. Now, people who actually approach the marketplace do so because of reasons for self satisfaction. They are reactors in the sense that whenever they need the product or service offering, they just go and immediately purchase it and consume it. So we call such people as self satisfiers and reactors, and the examples could be cigarettes or liquor or movies, and it is actually doing first or purchasing first and experiencing it and developing a feeling, and then learning to buy or not to buy, to consume or not to consume. So this is in terms of the do, feel and learn model. So we have these four quadrants. Each of these is going to identify and call the customers differently, either as informative, effective, habit formation or satisfaction, or in terms of thinker, feeler, doer and reactor. Each of the quadrant signifies different products and service categories that vary on levels of involvement, as high involvement or low involvement, and the consumer is high on thinking or on feeling, and the models could be placed anywhere as learn, feel, do, or feel, learn, do, or do, learn, feel, or do, feel, learn. Now, what are the implications for a marketer? The first implication that for a marketer is in terms of his communication strategy. For high involvement products and for high thinking products, that is the first quadrant, the marketer should basically provide such information about the product or service offering that helps him develop a favorable attitude for the brand, so that ultimately it could lead to a purchase. So the focus here is on factual relevance, and the media that he should choose is print media, either in the form of brochures or as advertisements in newspapers. For products in the second quadrant, which are high involvement and high feeling, he should basically devise such advertisements which actually arouse an affective state, which is very positive and very favorable. A good emotional and mood state would urge the consumer to learn more about the offering and encourage him to buy. So the focus here should be on both facts and entertainment. The media which he should use is audiovisual media. In case it is the visual media, it should be highly image based. For the third quadrant, where we have low involvement and low thinking, the marketer basically needs to develop brand loyalty. So promotion strategies should focus on creating brand recall. Advertisements again should focus both on facts as well as on entertainment. And the print media, the media which you should use is audiovisual media, again which is image based, and a lot of marketer has to do a lot of work to actually provide some POP stimuli or point of purchase stimuli. Point of purchase stimuli has a big role to play for habit formation in doers, because it facilitates easy recall and purchase of the brand. He will actually pull, the customer could pull the product out rather than in case of easy recall. So in case of easy recall, it's the consumer would be in a position to pull out the brand, and so POP is highly relevant for such quadrant, people in this quadrant. And then we have low involvement, low feeling, where consumers are driven by social pressures and brand loyalty is short-lived. So the promotional strategy should basically include social appeals with a lot of entertainment and orientation. So this is with respect to the first model, which basically runs from pre-attention to focal attention to comprehension and elaboration. Each of these levels, pre-attention, focal attention, comprehension and elaboration, is indicative of different levels of message processing. So if we see in the first stage, which is pre-attention, the level of involvement is very low. It requires very limited processing, and the desire is to just gain familiarity or some level of familiarity with respect to the product, service offering or the brand. In the case of focal attention, where the level of involvement increases a little bit, the consumer becomes more receptive to the message source and the message context, and he becomes a little receptive to basic information about the product or the service offering or the brand. In the third level, which is comprehension, we see that the high level of involvement increases, and the person now elaborates more on the on the product or service brand in terms of the price, the features, the benefits, the availability, etc. The consumer here focuses here more on the message content, and in the elaboration, which is the highest stage of involvement, the consumer will integrate the message into his memory. He will form beliefs, and he'll either add up to or modify or information that already exists in his memory. So if we see a level of message, level of involvement or level of consumer involvement will have an impact on how a message is processed across each of these stages of pre-attention, focal attention, comprehension and elaboration. In the case of pre-attention, there is just going to be minimal familiarity. Focal attention, he'll become more receptive. Comprehension, he'll begin to understand and evaluate information, and in elaborate, he'll integrate whatever message he has been exposed to into his memory and into his database. Now this has implications for a marketer. The marketer should basically design his communication or his promotion mix in a manner which is more compatible to the majority of the segment. So in case the segment is a high involvement segment, then the message has to be framed accordingly, and in case it's a segment which is low on levels of involvement, the message would be different. Also for high involvement products, the marketer needs to move consumers from low levels of involvement to high levels of involvement. So he has to move them from pre-attention to elaboration, because he wants to, because he would like, as we've seen, high involvement products means there's going to be more of information search, more of cognition, and the marketer would have to put in a lot of effort to be basically be chosen. So he would always want to position his product or talk about his product, his services, benefits, features, attributes in great length, and he would want the consumer to understand this as well, so that the computer can so that the consumer can judge them better than other brands. So in this case, he would always want them to move from lower levels of pre-attention to high levels of elaboration, where the consumer is exposed to a message, elaborates on it, comprehends it, integrates it with his memory, and finally takes a call. So, this is what we mean by the level of message processing model. Now, let us come to the third model, which is the product versus brand involvement model. Now, this model basically tries to study involvement at two levels, at the product level and at the brand level. Now, the general assumption here is that people are often involved with the product category, but may not be involved with the brand, or they may be involved with the brand, but may not be involved with the product category, or they may be involved with both of these, or may not be involved with either of these. So, based on this assumption, this particular model says that we could actually classify consumers on the basis of their involvement with the product and with the brand. And we have this quadrant here where we have study involvement on two dimensions. We study product involvement on one dimension, which can be classified into high and low, and we have again brand involvement on the other level with a continuum from high to low. We could classify consumers based on their level of involvement with respect to the product and the brand into any of these four cells, and we have brand loyalists, we have information seekers, we have routine brand buyers, and we have brand switchers. So, if you look at brand loyalists, they are consumers who are highly involved with the product category as well as with the brand. So, the marketer here needs to provide information about the product category as well as about the brand. As the consumers are aware about the brand and are involved with the brand, they would tend to exhibit brand loyalty. Coming to information seekers, here they are highly involved with the product category, but level of involvement with the brand is low. So, they do not think much about the brand, they show less preferences towards the brand and do not basically have a established preferred brand. Brand loyalty is thus absent, if at all it is seen in very few cases. So, the consumer puts in a lot of effort to get information about the product and service category rather than the brand, and after they have processed the information about the product category and about the various brands, they will take a decision. They make a decision about which of the brands is the best. So, they are basically information seekers. Then we have consumers who are routine brand buyers, who are basically not highly involved with the product category, but they are involved with a particular brand in that product category. So, they have a loyalty towards the brand, although they do not have any they are not actually interested in the product category. So, but they have a preferred choice, they have a preferred brand, and if and when they need to use the product, they will choose that particular brand. So, they are essentially brand loyalists. And then we have brand switchers, who are neither involved with the product category nor with the brand, and they buy anything that they can get hold of, and they are not very particular about the product or about the brand. So, they keep switching off from one brand to the other. They have no emotional bonds or they have no connect with the brand, and such consumers are often price sensitive, and they respond to price, and they are deal hunters. They look for bargains and are more they look for special deals and bargains. Now, what are the implications for a marketer? For brand loyalists, the marketer should place emphasis on winning customers and creating brand loyalty. They should provide information about the brand, how the brand is better than the other brands. They should try also to form an emotional connect with the consumer. So, promotional messages should be both informational and emotional, and they should reinforce brand loyalty. As far as information seekers are concerned, marketer should make sure that he provides consumers with relevant information about the product category as well as about the brand. Stress how stress information about the product, also stress how the brand is better than the competitive brands, and emphasize on product features, attributes and benefits. For brand loyalists, for routine brand buyers, the marketer should encourage and continue with routine brand loyalty. They should use emotional appeals. They can also go in for loyalty programs. And then for brand switchers, the marketer basically needs to use economic appeals and emphasize on the price, on the brand and comparison with the brand, and on discounts, savings, value for money, etc. Now, this brings us to an end into the discussion about on the various models. Now, let us come to the consumer involvement and its implications for the marketer. So consumer involvement has implications for a marketer, as we all know. Consumer involvement will affect the manner in which people collect information, comprehend information, they transmit information, typically word of mouth, and they make purchases and also make post-purchase evaluation. So the marketer needs to understand the process and design in his marketing mix in a manner that can activate the consumer involvement process. So first, the study of consumer involvement helps a marketer assess how the majority of the segment relates to the purchase in terms of high or low involvement. If the majority of the segment views it as a high involvement, the decision making is rational, although there may be an emotional and an egoistic element also. For example, while buying a car, a rational mind would look for mileage and engine, emotional mind will think of color and aesthetics, and an egoistic mind would relate it to pride and ego. So on the other hand, if the majority of the segment is a low involvement, the rational decision making becomes emotional in nature. The marketer could gain insights into high and low involvement purchase decisions and accordingly bring about changes in his marketing strategy. For high involvement products, he needs to provide information about the product category and about the brand, and he has to talk about features, attributes, benefits. He also has to stress how his product is better than the other, and he has to focus on product differentiation. A longer format media needs to be used, like print media or brochures or journals or special interest magazines. As far as low involvement media is concerned, he would basically talk about as far as low involvement purchases are concerned, he will talk of emotional appeals, and advertisement should focus on audiovisual media. Point of purchase stimuli, brand store display, and attractive merchandise can also help boost sales. On the other hand, if a marketer is confronted with a segment which is both high and low on involvement, he will have to deal with both the segments accordingly. He needs to take a decision after understanding the size of the segment. If only a small segment operates on high involvement or low involvement, then it may not be feasible for him to serve both the segments. Basically, when we are talking of involvement, we see that the marketer's job is to move people from lower levels of involvement to higher levels of involvement generally for high involvement product categories. So he has to trigger off the involvement levels so that consumers become more receptive to the product or service offering. They try to know about it, they try to learn about it. For certain kinds of products and services, he has to move them from levels of low to high involvement. Study of involvement will also tell him about the segment, whether it is high or low on involvement, and accordingly he will have to devise his strategies. So whether it is his, especially with reference to his communication strategy, choice with respect to the media, whether it is print or audiovisual media, whether it is focus on message content or context, whether it appeal will be rational or emotional or social, whether he has to stress upon functional benefits or on emotions and social benefits, whether he has to lay emphasis on print media or audiovisual media. Any and all of these decisions will basically depend upon the level of involvement which a particular segment has. For some cases where he has a heterogeneous group and where he has people who are both high and low on involvement, there he will have to try to see which of the segments more feasible to basically focus upon. He will also have to see whether people are loyal to the product category or to the brand. So whether with respect to the cognition, attitude and behavior sequence, or with respect to level of processing, level of message processing sequence, or with respect to product and brand loyalty, he has to he can draw a lot of learnings from the study of involvement, and he can benefit from this study on consumer involvement. Let us now come to the references. Asel, Consumer Behavior and Marketing Action, PWS Kent, Boston. Lindquist and Sergi, Shopper, Buyer and Consumer Behavior, Theory of Marketing Applications, Bistantra. Loudon and Della Bitta, Consumer Behavior, 4th edition, Tata McGraw-Hill. Peter and Olson, Consumer Behavior and Marketing Strategy, McGraw-Hill, 7th edition. Schiffman and Kanu, Consumer Behavior, Prentice Hall, 8th edition. Vogue, How Advertising Works, a Planning Model, Journal of Advertising, Volume 25, Number 5, page 27 to 33, 1980. Vaughan, Richard, 1986, How Advertising Works, a Planned Model Revisited, Journal of Advertising Research, Volume 26, Issue 1, page 57 to 66, and Wells and Prensky, Consumer Behavior, John Wiley, 1996. Frequently asked questions: write short notes on low involvement learning model and the level of message processing model. So, we have discussed these models. You have to elaborate on low involvement learning model and how low involvement products and services with respect to their sequence of the tri-component C, B and A. The level of message processing model, you will talk about the stages of pre-attention, focal attention, comprehension, elaboration, and we will see how as level of involvement increases, there are changes in across pre-attention, focal attention, elaboration, and comprehension, and comprehension and elaboration. And then question number 2, explain the learn, feel, do hierarchy model and suggest implications for a marketer. So, we will talk about the 4 quadrants, and you will explain how the model is relevant to the marketer. Question number 3, why is the study of consumer involvement important for a marketer? So, we have just discussed this, and we now move to self-evaluation tests and quizzes. Section A, state true and false. Statement A: for high involvement products, the tri-component model arranges cognition, attitude and behavior in a sequence as C, B and A. So, is it a true or a false statement? This is a false statement. It is C, A, B and not C, B, A. Statement 2, for high involvement, high thinking products, the focus of the advertisement should be on factual relevance. Well, this is a true statement. It should absolutely be on factual relevance. Brand switchers are price sensitive and respond to price. Well, this is a true statement. Fill in the blanks. A learn, feel, do model is a simple matrix that links consumer decision making and choices to 3 components, which are dash, feel and dash. So, it is learn, feel and do. Dash results from habit forming within the consumer. So, low involvement, low thinking results from habit formation within the consumer. Dash are consumers that are highly involved with the product category as well as the brand. Well, this is brand loyalists are people who are highly involved with the product category and with the brand. Multiple choice questions: which of the following is false about high involvement, high thinking situation? Decision making involves a lot of thinking. The strategy model is feel, learn, do. The consumers have a high need for information, and consumer decision making is driven by economic motives. The statement which is false is B, which is strategy model is feel, learn, do. This is a wrong statement. This is false. Question number 2, which of the following is true about brand loyalists? Consumers who fall in the category are neither involved with the product category nor with the brand. Such consumers are price sensitive and respond to price. Consumers put in efforts to search out, collect information about the product category and the various brands. And D, none of the above. So, the statement which is true is actually none of them. So, the answer is D, none of the above. Statement 3, promotional messages for information seekers must lay emphasis on dash rather than emotions. So, they must lay emphasis on information rather than emotions. So, it is going to be A. Short questions: name any 2 products that fall into the category of feel, learn, do. It will be fashion, apparel, jewelry, perfumes. Question number 2, mention characteristics of high involvement, high feeling quadrant of the learn, feel, do hierarchy model. So, the person here is drawn by feeling, he is drawn by emotional and psychological motives, they become feelers, and the strategy is feel, learn and do. Name the 4 levels of message processing model: pre-attention, focal attention, comprehension and elaboration. So, this brings us to an end of session 5 of module 6.1, and with this we conclude motivation and needs, emotions and moods and consumer involvement. We shall be moving on to the next module, which is 6.2 on consumer learning, in the next session. Thank you.